let's start with what is Open Woodlands Restoration and a bit of the story. Thank you. What we're looking for is a situation where you don't have too few trees or too many trees, but a sweet spot of trees. Now, when Australians, as we think of them, rather than the Indigenous traditional owners of 60,000 years, came to this part of the world, the science was very complex to understand the interactions between soils, grasses, and rainfall. And unfortunately, they were looking for simple instead of accurate answers. And so the simple answer was that trees and grass compete for every 100 mils of rainfall. And therefore, what you have is decreasing grass productivity with increasing numbers of trees. And that paradigm led to us clearing the land for 200 years. And it's only been through fantastic research science and people like Sue Ogilvie in the audience starting to show us the relationship between economic outcomes and tree proximity, for example, that start to teach us that there is a sweet spot that occurs where you've got a balance between the trees cycling different levels of nutrients and the grasses cycling from another level of nutrients, and the water and evaporation and the microclimate and the biodiversity and the interaction between those minerals, moisture, and natural processes going on. So how do we, in a landscape that's been largely cleared, replicate the not too many trees, which you can think of in a lot of cases as the national parks, and not too few trees, which you often see eroding in the landscape with poorer and poorer soils and not enough shade and shelter to provide protection for the farmers? Well, the answer is you need to let trees, shrubs, and grasses establish in an open and clumpy style of ecosystem where there's multiple stories, where there's enough space for grasslands, where there's enough shade for different types of grasses, where there's enough symbiosis between them. And so a design was hatched, and we're going to hear from Dr. Jeff Kay, an ecologist in woodlands ecosystems, talk about this design. But essentially it looks like tram tracks, direct seeded, so that what emerges is what's suitable for that microclimate, and a large gap before another set of tram tracks quite close together, direct seeded, and another gap, and then you repeat. Thank you, James. And what that tends to create is great biodiversity outcomes, better productivity outcomes. And in Australia, we have a carbon market, which is governed by methods. There is a method for planting trees. It's called environmental plantings. And if you plant trees, you could choose to plant them arboretum style, one every 3.5 meters going in this direction and in that direction. And you get a uniformity of canopy, a uniformity of trees, and growth of the same type of trees at the same age. And you miss out on that open and clumpy woodland design. What we've been able to do with the open and clumpy direct seeded tram tracks that have those gaps is still get the trees to the minimum 2-meter height that they need to get to, and the 20% canopy that is a requirement for them to then be considered a carbon forest. And so what you've done is you've gone from no carbon counted towards the Australian method by having cleared land to carbon that is now counted under the Australian carbon method. And that generates, for the landholder, carbon credits. And those can be sold to receive a new income stream. And so you have from this design the ability to get a carbon outcome leading to new income, biodiversity outcomes leading to greater resilience and better condition of the environment, and productivity increases. And so we might just look at a woodland station, and you might be expecting that within a whole farm, when you break up the land management units, there'll be riparian areas, there'll be cleared areas, there'll be existing wooded areas, there might be cropping or irrigated or other activities. So when you look at a whole farm, you're looking for land management units that make sense, that are already cleared, that could be restored. So in this case, we're looking at a farm in the Southern Tablelands, about 4,000 hectares, and there's several project areas that could be identified. Next slide, please. And so on one area, you might use the same design, but alter it for that terrain. Alter it in terms of whether you're doing 100% direct seeding, or maybe you might actually only do 50% direct seeding and you need to do 50% tube stock because it's inappropriate or inaccessible to do direct seeding. And then there might be areas where those cleared areas are surrounded by existing trees, but you need to consider fencing, because fencing is important when you're establishing trees, because deers, goats, sheep, cattle, everything likes to eat new trees. And if your purpose is to get the trees to 2 meters tall and 20% canopy cover, you can't have them eaten out. And so there's different ways of dealing with the ecosystem that's in front of you. One of the interesting things is we're dealing with a long-term investment in productivity, carbon, and biodiversity. So one thing I'll tell you is this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a design that will take trees 5 to 7 years in this environment to get to the point where they're contributing carbon. And at the moment, most of the costs are in fencing and upfront design and in direct seeding or tube stock. And that's worn by the proponent at this stage. And so once you start generating carbon credits, which are the only form of substantial income at the moment from doing open woodland, but we're looking at stacking. Once you get that carbon, it takes a while to pay off those initial costs. But over the course of a 25-year project, it has an increased return in terms of productivity and a really good internal rate of return overall on 25 years. But there's no doubting in my mind that, the participation, whilst farmers wear the upfront costs and it's got such a delay until it pays off, it's not going to go mainstream. And so what we've seen with Open Woodlands Restoration is typically it's the innovator pioneer styles of farmers that are looking to put more trees in their landscape. And this aligns with what they want to do. We won't see the ability for this design to crawl across the least productive areas of a farm and upgrade them, or crawl across the broader landscape and give us connectivity and biodiversity corridors until we overcome that funding issue, or that financing issue. But we will start to see, pioneers adopting this, and it start to be a genuine intervention that makes sense for landholders to do at scale. And that helps us achieve biodiversity outcomes, restoration of box gum grassy woodlands, and even meeting national and even farm level carbon credit requirements. Next one, please. So we do like Open Woodlands Restoration. You'll hear a bit more about me and the organisation Regen Farmers Mutual a bit later. But I would suggest to you that instead of hearing about, somebody who's not doing this, talking about it, let's hear from the farmers that have done this